My name is Justin Otero, and we're going to be talking about engineering with AI, adoption, and the impact. So a little bit about me. Today, I grow individuals and engineering teams. I do this in a few different ways. First being through community service content. That's stuff you'll see on social media where I'm just sharing insights on how to grow, as well as I have a software engineering coaching program where I help engineers grow, increase their impact, influence, and income. And then speaking engagements like this where I can share more with the community. And then lastly, just directly managing engineering teams. You can scan this QR code if you want to get connected or kind of see some of the other events that will be happening. All right, so today we're going to go over productivity. There's quite a bit of stuff in here, so I do ask that you hold your questions till the end. There will be room for that. As well as a lot of this is going to be insights based on a large organization adopting AI. And so some of the metrics I can't specifically share. However, it will be trends based. So it will be very helpful in that sense. But yeah, so we're going to talk about why the engineering team is focusing on productivity, kind of what the adoption looks like, what we tracked during this process, the current use cases that are very valuable to the company. We'll go into an engineering demo, and then I'll talk about what we've learned along the way, some future tools that we have to be monitoring because this industry is moving so fast. It's very important that we stay on top of everything, as well as make sure the teams have the best tools available at all times. And then we'll kind of summarize and talk about next steps. So let's get going. So why focus on productivity? The first being every company wants to increase velocity. If we can deliver more value, we can allow developers to focus on bigger problems. Right? This is the most simplest form of why productivity is needed. Engineers, they will have more room to think about integrating AI with the system. Very simple, do more with less. I'm sure you see there are lots of layoffs, right? Even when you're trying to hire engineers for your own business, you are commonly thinking, oh, I can get a team in another country to do this, right? Cost is a real thing, and engineering costs are one of the biggest expenses for companies today. And then we want to increase quality. AI is able to detect patterns. AI is able to really be more consistent. It's trained on the best open source code out there. And so we want to reduce bugs and ensure that customers are getting high quality products. And then my favorite reason why productivity is top of mind for companies is FOMO. Believe it or not, across the world, people are making very wild claims about how productive people are becoming, right? And I've seen it firsthand, especially in Silicon Valley. There are new companies out there with very, very large valuations with a fraction of the size of an engineering team that most companies have. So what you can do with 5 engineers is something that 50 engineers were doing last year, right? And so if we're not moving and adopting these tools, we are at risk, right? And then you have non-technical people who are able to produce high quality products. The question is, if they can do that, what can a software engineer do? Most of you have heard of this, GitHub Copilot. This was a plugin. This is integrated into your current IDE experience, so your independent development environment. And this was really able to give auto suggestions. So as you're typing, you're able to tab, and it would almost like if you're typing in a Gmail and it knows the next word that you want to do, very much just like that. But it being a plugin and it being through GitHub, it was very limited. You couldn't choose what model. You got to just use what GitHub Copilot provided for you. The next iteration was Code GPT. We saw a lot of improvement with this, and if you actually see here, within where you prompt, you can now start to choose which model you're going to use, so which LLM. And this was really good. Depending on the task, you can choose what is best for that, as well as you can manage costs, because if you are paying for this stuff and you've ran out of free credits, you're switching over to the next best model, right? The other thing that CodeGPT did really well was it gave you some predefined prompts. So you can see explain, like you're a new developer in a new code base, explain to me what this piece of code is doing. Imagine you work in the front end and you want to understand back end. Now you can go into the Java code base or Python code base and be like, explain this to me and explain it to me like I'm a front end engineer. Next, you have writing tests, you have find bugs, optimize, and refactor. So just having these predefined prompts was also really, really powerful. And of course, it's a plugin. So wherever you are, whatever coding IDE experience you like, these two tools were able to be embedded in there. But Cursor came out. Cursor came out mid-2024, and this was very, very different. This was a full IDE experience. It's built off of VS Code, so that is actually one of the problems. So if you weren't familiar with VS Code and you were editing in a different tool such as like IntelliJ products, this was a big thing to adopt. But we're actually going to talk about how this was adopted and why we chose to go with Cursor. So when you are trying to evaluate which IDE experience or whatever coding agent you want to do, you need a framework essentially. And this is what I recommend to really determine whether or not your company should adopt, this tool or another tool. The first is a range of experience. A more experienced engineer, such as a senior engineer versus a junior engineer, new grad, their ability to adopt and leverage this is going to be important, right? So you need both ends of the spectrum to run through the rest of these testing scenarios. Next, you need different stacks. The most common is backend and front end, and that's what most engineering teams and or companies have the most of, right? And so you want to take someone who's very experienced in one or the other to also evaluate this. Next, you have to fully immerse them, right? You can't just have them like tiptoe around, right? You need to just have them 100%, this is the editor that they're going to use. And then you need different types of projects. As all of you know, if you have any sort of thing, any type of project, you have new code. New code is always the easiest code to build, right? Because you don't have to worry about anything else. There is no impact yet. The next is refactoring. This is where someone needs to understand what the system does and how is it going to change. Next is extending. Like you have this, imagine like you have a building and now you want to add a room to the building, right? Can it follow the guidelines, the style, everything in there? Bug fixes. Is it able to identify bug fixes, right? Usually a developer knows in their mind, you could just describe to them the problem, like, I kind of know where it's at, but can the AI do that? And then testing, we already knew AI was great at writing tests, but can it do it in an agentive way? Can it do it on its own and do it effectively? So this is the data that I recommend tracking. This is both qualitative and quantitative. The first being is usage. How much is it used? And you can actually measure this in Cursor. You can see how many requests are being made by which developer, right? If you're looking at ChatGPT, right, you could actually see again how many requests. So you can actually understand who's using it more, who's using it less. But you want to ask, what are they using it for, right? Are they asking it to just refactor a bunch of stuff, write tests? because that'll give you more context. You want to see if it is increasing velocity. Anyone who's in software knows that velocity is an important thing, but it's a little unclear how you track that, because that could be, are you delivering the expected amount of work in a period of time, or are you actually producing more code? And we can measure that through GitHub metrics, right, or GitLab metrics. So velocity is going to be your company or just like your team specific measurement. Next is code volume. And you can measure this by commit size as well as number of pull requests. But what you have to be careful with code volume is people think more is better. That is absolutely not the case, right? More code, more problems, right? It's very simple. Like, it's just more stuff to maintain. Next, you're going to look at quality, and this is bugs produced. You can actually look at the exceptions, so errors, and you can do this through your observability tools such as Datadog, New Relic. So you're actually measuring this over a given time period. And then complexity. We have static tool analysis that tell us how complex is a specific code, and you can actually track that over time too. So we have analysis just measuring like cognitive complexity. So imagine if you were writing a book, is the book at a 5th grade level or is it at a collegiate level? Collegiate level doesn't actually mean it's good, right? It means it's harder for other people to understand. And then lastly, which I think is the more important piece, that this is why tools like this are really important, is the developer experience. Are engineers happy using it? So I'm gonna walk you through a demo. It's about 10 minutes. I wanted to do it live, but when you start to work with AI, you don't know if the request and the prompt that you're asking is gonna take 15 seconds or is it gonna take 15 minutes, right? There is a range of that. But what I am gonna show you is this cursor that I just downloaded is default settings. So there is no additional work that I put into it to like massaging and setting up any settings, rules, anything like that. So this is, if you were to download Cursor today, this is the experience you will get. I also had a demo app like prepared so we can like start to extend and like improve things and put some additional features in. And let's take a look. So this is a new app I just pulled down from GitHub. It knows nothing about the application, but I just told it start the app. It's reviewing all of the code, trying to figure out what command do I need to run. And it's finding the command. But what's actually really interesting is because this is default Cursor, it's not going to run the command in the terminal. There is a setting here called YOLO mode. And YOLO mode, you know, if you know what YOLO is, I'm actually gonna stop it and say, use YOLO mode, and I'm gonna give it the command again, start my app, and this time it's actually gonna run that command. So now it has full control over my terminal, and it can start to execute stuff. You could see where it could honestly just delete everything on my computer if it wanted. So it's, you know, you gotta be careful with it, but I work in YOLO mode. It is just, it's what I do. Cool, so now it started the app. It's running on port 3000. I'm just gonna do some quick QA, just make sure the app is still running, make sure some of the stuff is working. Cool, I can make some changes, things are updating. I'm happy now. So now we're on to really the next task. Right here, this app in particular doesn't have delete functionality, but you could see I can multi-select some stuff, and you know the delete button shows, you know, delete n number of items, but when I try to delete it, nothing happens. So now let's see what Cursor can do. I'm gonna ask it to specifically make the delete functionality work. And I'm, you know, trying to be specific. I'm saying when I press the delete button with one or more items, it should properly delete those. I also said delete order functionality. This is gonna be important because I didn't realize this when I was prompting it. I told it to delete the orders. There's actually other things in the system that I want it to delete, and I didn't realize that as I was having the conversation. But I can also show you how right now, like one of the things, like as you're producing a lot of code, you need to review it. In YOLO mode, it's just making all these changes, but you can actually review code in cursor line by line. So imagine if you had a pull request and you're looking at a diff of code, you can actually verify line by line what's happening, as well as it's showing you over here the summary of what it's doing. And this is really important because maybe I just disagree with that. I could reject it right there. You can actually accept the whole file. You can see there. So if there's a bunch of other changes, you can accept those. But as of now, it's going through and it has added the delete order functionality. And we're gonna go take a look at this right after I just verify some more changes. I'm like, this looks good. Very tedious. So quickly, I'm just like, all right, we're just gonna accept everything. I don't have time for this. And yeah, kind of review some more stuff. I'm like, forget it, accept it all. Now, again, I'm testing to make sure, like, does it do what I want it to do? Cool. And it's working. Now, this is the fun part. It accepts context. I just went online, I went to dribble.com, which is like pictures of like, you know, cool pieces of UI. I looked for a confirmation dialogue and I found some that I liked and I'm like screenshotting it. And I'm gonna just drop it into the chat here. So now it has a picture. And I want the delete functionality to prompt me with this confirmation. I told it to use my style tokens. So I gave it some additional context about the code base, but I gave it liberty on the red and the iconography. Like, just do as you wish. And it's going and creating this. But again, it says orders. This is where, as the user, and I'm not paying attention because I'm asking it something and I'm on my phone. I'm not even looking at it. I'm like getting up, doing stuff. But you can see, I'm actually on the products page. And I'm trying to test this delete. And I'm like, why isn't it working? So, like anyone, I'm like, it's not appearing, fix it, right? Because I'm not, again, I'm lazy at this point. So it's like, okay, let me go look, and it tries to determine what is the problem. And, you know, I can see like, oh, okay, maybe the overlay, maybe it's there, but like other stuff is on top of it, like the Z index is off. And I'm like verifying, okay, sounds good. Continue, let me test again. Still on the products page, not paying attention to what it did and what I'm actually verifying. Still not working, what's wrong, right? Because at this point I want it to be smart. And again, still on the products page, I'm getting frustrated, and when you ask it to do something and you come back and you're just trying to verify like, what did it do, I'm just like, okay, stop. I tell it to stop, and now I'm just full argument mode. I'm telling it like, be specific, start to be systematic, and it actually starts to write log statements and log all the behavior that it's doing, because it's like, you're telling me something's wrong. Let me go put some logging in there, and you'll start to see it in the console here, where it's now debugging like an engineer on its own. Finally, I realized like, oh, wrong place. Like, great, it's working. I was on the products page, not the orders page. And it's like, oh, like, good to know. But I also am unhappy because it didn't make it look like the picture. So now I'm like, all right, we have to do some more work, kind of more massaging, like it needs to listen. Like, fix the layout. I'm gonna screenshot the image. Actually, I didn't have the image here, so I'm gonna go screenshot it one more time. All right. So, and this happens, right? You have to check its work and really like guide it to the solution. Finally, it does what I want it to do. It looks good enough for me. And I do some more tests, kind of test the other areas. I'm happy. Now we're on to the next task. So what you saw there was like delete, right? There was a confirmation. And that's the only time a confirmation will appear. As an engineer, I know I need something more generic. I want it to extend this behavior. So I'm actually asking it to create a dialogue service. So abstract that behavior, because as you saw, like there's a confirm, there's a warning message, and even in the example that I saw from Dribble, you know, there's different things. There's a success one, right? So I tell it to now abstract the behavior, make it more reusable, because I want to use this in more places under more use cases. And I learned my lesson. I'm like, and make sure it works, right? So now review your own work, basically. So it now gives me the summary of what it did. Then I'm going to just make sure it's still working. Everything that was there is still working as expected. All right. So this is going to be where things get really fun, because now I just created this abstract dialogue service. I want it to create documentation for it, because as it creates documentation, not only can other engineers leverage that to learn how to use it, but now it can also learn from its own documentation. I also told it to write some tests for me. You may have missed that, but I did ask for it to write tests. And I'm also asking, like, do they work? Because I know I have to be specific. So it runs it, and sure enough, one's failing. So it knew it failed, and now it's automatically fixing that stuff on the fly for me. I don't even have to tell it. Cool. So now the tests are all passing, and everything's good. So far you've seen a few things, right? You've seen we added some context, right? We've saw it made some mistakes, and the mistakes were actually from me not paying attention, but it still was like, okay, I'm going to iterate and try to figure out what you're saying, because something isn't working, right? So it started to debug. Then we extracted that behavior, made it more general. We then created documentation for it, and it wrote tests. Now we need to get some rules in there, because I can't be there to like constantly tell it what to do and pay attention. So we're going to create some standardization in this environment. I'm going into the settings here, and I'm going to create user rules. There are rules now that you can put at the project level, but these user rules are going to tell it, I want you to write tests. If there are no tests, create the tests. Make sure the tests always run. Here's some document. I want you to also document things, and if the documentation's not there, create it. And I also want you to create it in a very, very specific format. So we know there's documentation, we know there's tests in the system. So now we're going to tell it, if you just saw that just like a little bit ago, here we go. So now the rules are in there. We're going to tell it to create a success dialogue. I know it didn't create that, so we're going to just screenshot that. And what you're going to see is it's going to update documentation on the fly. It's also going to write tests. Actually, I think it just implements it and writes tests. I have to actually remind it to write the documentation. So as it goes through, it's generating. Okay, so now it's running the tests as it's supposed to based on the rules, and it says they're passed. Okay, but I know something's off, right? Because at this point I'm paying attention, and I'm like, use all the rules. You forgot an important rule about documentation. And it's like, you're right. Let me go and update the documentation. But because there was documentation there, not only did it need to update it with the new behavior, but it also needed to update it based on the format I want my documentation to be in. So it created the new format added context for all of those things, examples, and now from this point on, anything I do in this editor, it's going to follow those rules. It's going to create tests, run tests. It's going to create documentation, make sure it's all in the right format. So it'll clean up as I go. This stuff may not even be there, and there could just be new stuff, and it'll just always have that. And this is the power of an agentic IDE experience, where now there are these triggers that instead of you remembering to do this stuff, it's going to do this stuff for you. So, some of the things we've learned, and we've learned at scale, we're talking through quality right now. There are 4 key areas in quality. One is standardization. Assembly is required, and I'll talk about that. The quality overall is there, and then system level thinking. So when it comes to standardization, if your code base doesn't have standards, if it doesn't have a style guide, it's going to get very unmaintainable. Imagine having, hundreds of engineers trying to produce code autonomously, and they can do it however they want, right? So you need standards. Even if you're coding and you want like your friend to come in and like help you on something, and they start doing things different, you're like, hey, don't do that, right? But you need the AI to understand that. If you have third-party libraries that you use in your code base, you want to set the standard and say, we use these libraries, right? If you're gonna bring in a new library, make sure you ask, because bringing in a new library can, really increase your bundle size, right? Increase your package size. So you want to make sure you tell it, hey, these are approved. Don't use anything without asking. What internal things are built? As you saw when I told it, hey, use these style tokens, I was giving it context like, hey, make sure you use what's built. Don't just go build new things. And then what norms are there? When you work with people, you'll realize like maybe if you write code, you always do something, right? How can you make sure that the AI does that? Anything that is tribal knowledge, that needs to be set as a rule.
I have a question. Do you keep it on the same default AI model?
I'm using Claude 3.7 and sometimes thinking, but I'm usually using the latest model. So yeah, Cursor has a bunch of updates for that. And like I'll actually talk more about that a little later. So assembly required. If you asked AI to give you a car, are you getting a Hummer or are you getting a Prius? The fact that you don't know is the problem. And so what an engineer should be doing is they need to balance components versus features. When you are asking AI to do something, you want to be very specific. You want to say, I'm looking for a search functionality, right? That's great. You're thinking at the feature level. But when you start to think about the pieces of a feature, that is where things get really powerful and you can build something way more robust. And so being able to go between the feature and component level is going to be a skill that people will have to develop a lot further. Overall, quality is there. I'm very happy with it. Companies are very happy with it. You do need guardrails, right? So if you're coding on your own project, you probably don't have testing in place. You're probably not even getting your code reviewed by someone else, right? But at scale, this is happening, and this will ensure the quality is there. And if you can, you want to do it granularly. And that's why Cursor excels, right? Seeing those line by line changes and being able to accept, that is very powerful. And then it can make mistakes. You saw that it did some things, like it didn't remember to do stuff. Honestly, the overall output outweighs any of those infrequent issues, right? Like a good engineer can catch those, as well as our testing and our review process will ensure those things don't happen. And then, yeah, like I said, issues, you want them caught ahead of time through the review process. So, systems thinking. Engineers should be aiming to become a product engineer. You need to be super involved at the business level, understanding the overall system because you're going to have a much broader scope. And it's no longer about like those implementation details. Like it can be when necessary, but you don't have to think and worry about that as much anymore. So, how has this affected people? More experienced engineers are being enhanced. Less experienced engineers are not gaining depth, and that gap is widening. So, an experienced engineer, them getting better and them being able to use a tool and to know how the system works and to know exactly what I want, that is so much easier for them. A less experienced engineer doesn't have the depth of knowledge, so it can't tell when it's doing something wrong, right? And that is starting to be perpetuated more and more. And then any lack of experience using a coding agent requires it. It results in a lot of trial and error. You could see even for me, like if I'm lazy, I'm just like, just go on, like try it again, try it again. Reluctance and skepticism. The more experienced you are, the more skeptical you are of it, naturally. And then, knowing when to use AI is a big differentiator. And then the more experienced you are, the more opinionated you are. So you actually will have more stylistic concerns about what it's doing. Imagine you're a writer, you care more about punctuation than someone who doesn't write for a living. And then muscle memory. So you can't underestimate shortcuts. When you take someone out of an environment where they've been coding and they have all this muscle memory, and you take them out and you throw them into a new editor, that is very problematic. The shortcuts don't do the same thing. It starts to slow them down. So I've done this, and I still see people do it today. They have their favorite coding editor, the one that they're used to, and then they have Cursor. Right? Cursor is doing the thing, and then they're using the other editor to basically explore and try to figure out like where and what am I doing. So they might have two editors open. And then plugins helped with that. That's why CodeGPT and Copilot were helpful because you could stay where you're used to things. But someone like an iOS engineer, if they work in Xcode, they're not going to leave to use Cursor, right? So, like I said, muscle memory is still important. So, people, this is exactly what it feels like. This is an image of like someone just farming, and it's like cursors down, writing organic, farm-raised, non-GMO code by hand, the way our ancestors used to do it. This is a reality, right? This is kind of what it feels like now. Like things are changing, and a lot of people don't even understand fundamentals because frameworks abstracted those, and now people are using AI, and they're learning even less. So, the main use cases that I see the most productivity coming from, test coverage was always there. That was always good. Now it's agentic. Full code generation is used more than autocomplete now. Documentation, that, as you saw, is super helpful, as well as it helps the AI understand what's already in the code base. Pull request reviews. So not only do we use AI to generate code, we also use AI to review the code. You can see where there could be a problem, but it's more about, hey, can AI just check more specifically, is there optimizations? Is there improvements? Can we make things more clear? As well as we use AI to diagram the flow of our code. So we can actually diagram things and allow someone else reviewing what's actually happening here. And then exploration. Engineers are able to now build more stuff, more proof of concepts. I'm exploring like, should we really be paying for this like little tool, or should we just build this in-house now, right? So we are actually able to spend more time solving different types of problems. Some gotchas. This, I think, is what you should be keeping an eye out for. So when you were using chat-based, right, which is like CodeGPT, like those plugins, Copilot, it resulted in very specific changes because you were copying and pasting code, right? It couldn't do much more than that. Now there's lots of code that's being produced. And so it starts to do more. So depending on what you ask, as well as how proactive you are, you may get a lot more changes than you were expecting, which will have more ripple effects, more testing you'll have to do, more verification that it did the right thing. So frequent places where it will increase scope is linting. So if you have like some syntactical errors, it will try to fix that at whatever cost it takes, right? So it will start to change settings if it needs to fix stuff. If you use a strongly typed language and you want to change and update an interface, that interface, wherever it's going to be used, that's now all of the surface area that is impacted. And then adding packages. If it knows that there's a package out there that'll result in what it wants, it'll just go and download it. Or you need to tell it, hey, don't do that, we have something already, or build it on your own, right? So that's where the scope of the changes continue to increase. Context loss. You need to break up your work in manageable chunks. When it comes to increasing velocity, any engineer will know that when you have smaller tasks, it's a lot easier to deliver those tasks more effectively. Same thing with AI. You want to work in specific coding chunks. So a 2-hour session with AI is like 8 hours. And so what you can do in 2 hours of like paying attention is usually more than enough. But anything longer than that, you should have like absolutely saved your code changes. You should have had commits along the way. And so 2 hours is max the amount of time you should be spending with code through AI. And then over time, it'll lose context. So if I come back the next day, I need to remind it what we did, right? So you want to just make sure that if there's been a few hours of inactivity, you just start to remind it again, hey, remember we were doing this thing, and follow the rules. So yeah, you just want to do that. And then laziness. You could be as detail oriented as you want, but you will be lazy. And this is what it feels like. I feel like this when it's just not listening to me. It's like a child, and I don't know how many times I have to say this. Cursor's like, I don't know how to make him say the right thing because I don't understand him. Yeah, this is really what it starts to feel like. So, future evaluations. You want to stay ahead of the curve, and there are 4 things that are just non-negotiable at this point when it comes to AI coding editors. 1, it needs to be context-based. You need to be able to provide it links, articles, any sort of online references, images, internal documentation. You need to be able to give it that as context. No editor right now supports video, but once video is there, and within the next 3 months, it'll probably be there where you can just drop a video in as context. But that is required for any tool that I will ever consider working with. The next is choice of model. You have to be able to choose the model that's going to serve your task the best. It needs to be agentive. I want it to now do things at bulk. It needs to make edits on the fly. It needs to be able to think and iterate the way I would do it myself. And then I need rules. I need to be able to set boundaries for it. There are 3 coding editors that are really popular. Cursor is leading the pack. There's also Tray, and then Windsurf. The reason Windsurf is last is they were a plugin before, and then they just shifted over to a full editor. But I'm in the process of reviewing these. And even though like those could be good, I also need to manage costs, right? Like, so at the end of the day, what's going to give us the best results, and what's going to be affordable. So, plugin versus IDE, everyone is shifting to an IDE experience. DevX is going to be important. Developers have to enjoy it. They have to be able to like do their key bindings and make sure their shortcuts are working. And then, of course, we're going to be managing costs. So, overall trends. This is trends both internally at scale, what I'm seeing personally as like an engineering leader. So, as an engineering leader, I don't have time to code. Like I just don't. I'm more concerned about the overall execution of like business deliverables. But 1 hour of me coding is like 5 hours, right? So something that before I would just like, it's not even worth me doing it because I probably won't finish it. Now I'm like, oh, I'll actually deliver this. And so overall, we do see an increase in productivity. Time savings, it is safe to say it's like an engineer getting an extra work week. So at 25% increased productivity, that's 1 extra day of coding per week. And at the month level, that's an entire week of coding. Adoption matters. So most engineers at large are pushing Cursor. They're saying you need to be using Cursor in some way, shape, or form. But the main takeaway I want you to understand is like measuring like velocity is a little bit of like an art, right? Velocity, you can produce a bunch of code, right? You can make many changes, but at the end of the day, you want to be measured on impact. And your company and your team and your KPIs will determine what impact actually means. So if you're on a team that builds software for developers, right? Like you're in an internal team, if you are saving developers time, that is a big impact. Or if you are reducing bugs for the customer, that's a big impact. So velocity is just like one piece of it. And depending on how the developer adopts it and the type of work that the developer has will determine how powerful this can be. So, in summary, really like we explored how the coding agent's working, how we're using it, what you need to do to evaluate and ensure like, is this tool the right tool for me? And then we understood that depending on the type of work, right, it can be more or less helpful. So if you are building something brand new for a client, it's super helpful. It knows everything. If you have existing code that's been developed for years, it's going to be a little harder for it, right? Because now there's all this old code and we know how old code is. We look at it a week ago and we're like, why did we write this, right? And so depending on the type of task, the type of work, it can be more or less helpful. But the last thing is, and this like you guys really gotta like hone in on this. Coding is the bare minimum. Like the hard skills is the bare minimum because now I can give a tool like this to a non-technical person and they can deliver a high quality product. So an engineer now needs to focus on the overall longevity of the system, the maintainability, and all of the other things that are going to help them collaborate to think long term to deliver overall business value. And that's why they need to be shifting to product engineers and not just like these engineers that do a specific thing and that's what they're an expert in. The best engineers know that AI is not a replacement. Instead, they use their experience to guide it towards a clear goal and focus on impact, not code output. So I thought to myself, like, you know, in this presentation, I only have so much time. I think one person has their computer in the back. He's probably working on Cursor. I don't know. But I wanted you guys to like have a framework to understand how to think about using AI. And I know that like, I want you to be empowered, right? Like I want you to go home, like download this, check it out. But I also want to save you time and like let you learn from what I've seen. So next Thursday at 6 p.m. online, I'm just going to do a free engineering productivity masterclass where we're going to dive in. You're going to download Cursor. We're going to set up the rules both at the IDE level, at the project level, and we're just going to walk through how to set this up, and we're going to build some stuff together. Yeah, and like there was no way we're going to be able to do that here and like really like you guys get the best experience. So yeah, if you scan that one, you'll be able to sign up, and yeah, we'll get you guys up and running and really like developing with Cursor. And then the other one, like I said, if you want to get connected, you can do that there. So yeah, that is it. I want to thank Tim. Thank you for letting me come talk about AI. Yeah.